Thank you, Mr. President. To say America is a failing democracy is to misunderstand what democracy is. Democracy isn't a utopia, nor is it a guarantee. It is a promise, fragile, messy, a beautifully human promise that is constantly tested. Throughout its young life, American democracy has been tested many times. The nation's foundation is deeply intertwined with a legacy of white supremacy, evident in the violence of slavery and Jim Crow, the struggles of the Civil War, the internment camps of World War II, and the Cold War paranoia. In the modern era, the principles of American democracy have been further attacked, doubted, and undermined, from voter suppression to gerrymandering, and yes, even an insurrection. And yet, in every instance, it is the people who've held the state accountable, voting, marching in the streets, enacting laws, establishing checks and balances, and driving reforms to remedy the scars on history. It is the people who demand accountability from political representatives.
Point of information?
Not taken. America's democracy was designed to endure pressure. When populists or power-hungry leaders attempt to dismantle our system, they face the bulwarks of a free press, an independent judiciary, and a resilient civil society that will march, shout, and protest for the rights it deserves. And yes, they will run for Congress themselves. Tonight, let us all consider the essence of democracy. Democracy thrives on dissent, disagreement, and debate, the very qualities that critics will point to as signs of its failure. But I ask you, is it not competing voices that define our freedom? Are some of America's greatest accomplishments, indeed its very Constitution, not the result of compromise between vigorous opponents? A nation that tolerates dissent does not collapse, it strengthens its resolve. American democracy is loud because it is alive. Before I continue, it falls on me to introduce the proposition tonight. First, you heard from Ibrahim Osman Mawafi, a very dear friend of mine and our very impressive president. However, after bulldozing rules changes, losing a poll, and filibustering debates by hours and hours, Ibrahim knows a thing or two about failing democracies. I'm surprised to see him sitting on side proposition tonight. Perhaps he thought the motion was, this House believes you can destroy democracies in 8 weeks, a topic he'd be quite an expert in. Jokes aside, it has been such an honor and a privilege to serve alongside Ibrahim, someone who I think is one of the best presidents this union has ever seen. Next up is Israr Khan, a DPhil-in-law, another very close friend of mine, and our brilliant president-elect. Israr is from Pakistan, and I think his entire union career has been one big breakup letter to America. Nearly all of his speeches at the union have been anti-America, which makes a lot of sense. It's probably because the United States refuses to give Israr a visa. Honestly, Israr hates the US so much, it's literally his personality trait. Israr has also been at Oxford for a very, very long time. Freshers are genuinely confused whether Israr is a student or part of the museum collection. No wonder he thinks American democracy is collapsing. He hasn't seen functioning governance since the signing of the Magna Carta. The last two speakers on side proposition are Stephen Schmidt and Kishore Mahbubani. Stephen is the founder of The Warning, a daily newspaper, YouTube channel, and podcast that explains the turbulent times we are living in. He is also a renowned political strategist, having worked on the campaigns of President George W. Bush and Senator John McCain. Kishore Mahbubani is the former president of the United Nations Security Council, a distinguished Singaporean diplomat, and a global affairs expert. It is an honor to have you both joining us here tonight. Mr. President, These are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Let us all consider American institutions the bedrock of any democracy. The three main criteria of democratic backsliding are the erosion of judicial independence, freedom of the press, and the power of the people. However, in America, these institutions have not only survived assaults, but emerged stronger. The first criteria is judicial independence. In 2020, American democracy and its institutions were tested in an unprecedented way. Over 62 lawsuits were brought to overturn the results of a free and fair election. All but one failed, not because of political maneuvering, but because the courts, including Republican appointees, refused to bow down to authoritarianism. The system worked. Even when tested, it is the judiciary's independence, the refusal to yield to external pressures, that marks the strength of America's democracy, not its weakness. Furthermore, critics will argue that events like the Capitol insurrection on January 6th are proof of America's failure. But let us look deeper. A democracy's strength is not measured by the absence of challenges, rather, its response to those challenges. January 6th was a dark day in our history, but it did not spell the end of democracy. Congress reconvened that very night to certify the election results. Even if some insurrectionists receive pardons in the near future, many of them have spent the last few years being held accountable by our justice system, behind bars. Democracy was attacked, but it did not fall. It persevered. The second criteria is the press, a critical institution in any democracy. Time and time again, efforts have been made to undermine it. The label of fake news has been wielded like a weapon, an attempt to delegitimize and silence dissent. But despite these attacks, the press has remained steadfast. In fact, in the last few years, we have only seen a growth in independent journalists and media posts, adding to the chorus of public debate in America. These voices continue to investigate, to inform, and to challenge authority. It is the press that holds debates between political candidates on opposite sides of the aisle. It is the press that shouts questions in the halls of Congress and on the campaign trail, regardless of party. But yes, democracy is more than just its institutions and its free press. It is ultimately about the people who choose to operate within it. By almost every measure, America's democracy is more inclusive than one generation ago, and for that matter, every generation before that. Under the cloud of confusion that we operate in post-election, it may be difficult to take a step back and consider just how much progress we have made. When some of our grandparents were born, women were still left unheard at the ballot box. When many of our parents were born, African Americans were taxed at the polls. When many of us were born, marriage equality in the US was still over a decade away. We diminish democracy when we define it solely by the sum of our government institutions. These changes did not come by accident. The founders enshrined the rights of protest, speech, and petition so that when institutions fell short, the people could take on the project of crafting a more perfect union. To exclude this from our discussion of democracy would not only be myopic, but a disservice for all of those who have fought to make those strides in the very right direction. The women of Seneca Falls who endured beatings, imprisonment, and sexual assault on the way to suffrage. The people of Selma who marched forward even as dogs rained down on their heads. The people of Stonewall who fought back the full force of the machinery of the state just to exist. The people of Ferguson who inspired the newest generation to interrogate discrimination in their everyday lives. If anyone had the right to question whether American democracy had failed, whether it would ever serve them, it was these brave Americans. Instead, through community, creativity, and a sheer force of will, they vowed to make it work. Even today, the power of American democracy rests with its people. It is the millions of American voters who show up at the polls even when the odds are stacked against them. It is the grassroots organizers who fight for equity and justice. It is the journalists who uncover truths and the teachers who educate future generations for little pay and recognition. These are the people who breathe life into American democracy. Our democracy is one forged in struggle, born out of revolution, bloodshed, and violence, and refined through adversity. America may not be perfect, but it is not failing. It is working. To say otherwise is to ignore the strides of progress in the 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments, to give equal citizenship to all Americans, to give African Americans the right to vote, to give women the right to vote, to abolish poll taxes. And this resilience is not by accident, it is actually by design. The framers of the Constitution understood that democracy is not a static entity. When injustices are exposed, not always quickly, not always gracefully, but America does respond with an undeniable momentum towards progress. The current challenges are no different. Every setback in American history has been met with a resurgence of courage. Every moment of darkness has been met with the dawn. American democracy draws its strength not from perfection, but from the relentless determination of its people to bend the arc of justice ever close. So let us reject the notion of failure tonight. America's democracy is not failing, it is transforming, it is working. Every day, through every little act of civic engagement, every protest, every news story, every single vote. Yes, it has flaws, but these are not signs of weakness. They are opportunities for growth. America's democracy's challenges are not insurmountable, but invitations for all of us to rise. I urge you all to vote opposition tonight. Thank you.